My daughter-in-law looked me in the eye at Thanksgiving dinner and said, "You served your country, Margaret. That's great. But this is our family now, and frankly, you've never really fit in." My son nodded. My grandchildren stared at their plates. I set down my fork, looked at them both, and said, "Then I suppose I'll be canceling the trust." The room went silent. They realized their mistake too late. Welcome, and I'm so glad you're here with me today. Follow my story until the end, and please drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. I spent 31 years serving in the United States Army, and I've learned that the people who matter most are the ones you carry in your heart, no matter the distance. I'd been cooking since Tuesday, not because Thanksgiving requires 3 days of preparation, it doesn't, but because cooking is how I love people. It's how I've always loved people. When I was stationed in Germany in my 30s and couldn't get home for the holidays, I would host whoever was left on base. 16, sometimes 20 soldiers crowded into whatever space I could commandeer, and I would cook for every one of them like they were my own children. Now, I had a real home in Clarksville, Tennessee. The same brick colonial I'd bought when I retired from Fort Campbell 8 years ago. And I had a real family coming to fill it. My son Daniel was 34. He'd grown up watching me deploy and come home, deploy and come home. And somewhere in all that coming and going, I'd always believed we'd understood each other. He was quiet like his father had been, thoughtful, careful with his words. Or at least, he used to be careful. These days, I wasn't always sure whose words were coming out of his mouth. He married Renee 4 years ago. She was sharp and pretty, and immediately made it clear that she had very specific ideas about how things should be done, who sat where, which holidays belonged to her family versus mine, what Daniel ate for dinner, what opinions Daniel held. I'd told myself it was adjustment. Young couples find their rhythm. I'd give them space. I gave them plenty of space. I'd set the dining room table with the good linens my mother had passed down to me, the ivory ones with the embroidered edges she'd brought from Georgia when she was young. I'd polished the silver I almost never used. I'd made Daniel's favorite dishes, cornbread dressing, sweet potato casserole with the marshmallows slightly burned the way he'd loved since he was 7, green beans cooked slow with smoked ham, the way my grandmother had taught me. Daniel arrived first with their 2 kids, Sophie, who was 6, and Marcus, who'd just turned 4. The children ran to me the way children should, arms wide, zero hesitation. That part still worked. Sophie smelled like outside and maple syrup, and she pressed her face into my neck, and I held on a second longer than I probably should have. Renee came in behind them with a dish. She'd brought some kind of quinoa salad and set it on the counter, without a word about the food already covering every surface. She gave me a hug that barely qualified as one. The kind where both people lean in, but neither one actually makes contact. The drive was exhausting, she announced to no one in particular. Marcus screamed for 40 minutes. "I'll take them to the backyard," I said. "Burn some of that off before dinner." "He needs to rest." Marcus was at that moment running in a circle around my kitchen island making airplane sounds. He did not appear to need rest. I didn't say anything. I'd learned not to say anything. We sat down to eat around 2 in the afternoon, the November light coming through the dining room windows the way I'd always loved it, low and golden and forgiving. Daniel poured wine. I poured juice for the kids. Renee checked her phone and set it face up beside her plate, which was something I'd told Daniel privately bothered me more than once. He'd never mentioned it to her. Or if he had, it hadn't taken. For the first 20 minutes, things were fine. Sophie told me about her class hamster. Marcus ate 3 rolls. Daniel talked about his job at the engineering firm, a project that was running over budget, a coworker who was driving him crazy. I asked questions. I listened. This was what I knew how to do. I'd commanded units of people for decades, and the one skill that outlasted everything else was listening. Then Renee's phone buzzed. She glanced at it, and something in her expression shifted. "My mother wants to know if we can be in Brentwood by 7, she said to Daniel. "We told her we'd try," Daniel said. 7 is tight if we're still eating at 2:30. "It's 2:15, I said pleasantly. "We just sat down." Renee looked at me with an expression I recognized from certain officers I'd served under over the years. The ones who'd already decided the outcome of a conversation before it started. "Margaret, Mom." She caught herself, though the correction didn't feel warm. "We try to balance both families. You know how it is." I know I haven't seen my grandchildren since August, I said, and I've been cooking since Tuesday. Nobody asked you to cook since Tuesday. The table went quiet. Daniel picked up his fork and set it back down. Renee, he started. No, I'm serious. Margaret, we appreciate everything you do, but you create these elaborate productions and then you make us feel guilty when we have other obligations. Not everything can revolve around you. I looked at my son. He was studying his plate. Daniel, I said quietly. Is that how you see it? He was quiet for a long moment, long enough that I knew what was coming before he said it. Mom, Renee's folks haven't seen the kids much either. And honestly, he paused, and I watched him choose his next words with the particular care of someone who has rehearsed them. You've always had a way of making everything about your sacrifices, your service, your deployments, everything you gave up. And we're grateful, we are. But sometimes it feels like we can never measure up to what you expect from us. I'd been under mortar fire twice in my career. I'd received a letter telling me my marriage was over via fax while I was in Kuwait. I'd buried 2 of my soldiers and written letters to their parents that no letter could ever be enough for. I had developed, out of necessity, the ability to remain composed when the world was falling apart around me. I remained composed. So I'm asking too much, I said, by cooking Thanksgiving dinner and wanting my family to sit at the table for longer than 20 minutes. Renee set her phone down and folded her hands, and there was something almost rehearsed about the gesture, like she'd been waiting for an opening. You served your country, Margaret. That's great, but this is our family now, and frankly, you've never really fit in. The way you run things, the expectations you put on Daniel, the guilt, it's a lot. It's always been a lot. And my children need to grow up understanding that family isn't about obligation and debt, it's about joy. Joy. She used the word joy. I looked at Sophie, who had stopped eating and was watching me with very serious eyes the way perceptive children watch adults when they sense something important is happening. I looked at Marcus, who had no idea and was quietly stacking dinner rolls into a tower. I looked at my son, who was still studying his plate, and I thought about the boy who used to fall asleep on my chest during thunderstorms, who called me from his first day of basic training just to hear my voice, who cried at my retirement ceremony in the front row with absolutely zero embarrassment about it. I thought about the trust. Daniel and I had set it up 3 years ago after my financial planner had strongly recommended it. The house, my retirement accounts, my military pension benefits, all of it structured and designated. It was not a small amount. 31 years of service, careful saving, the sale of a condo in Tacoma. Daniel was the sole beneficiary. We'd never discussed it much because it had never needed discussing. I set down my fork very carefully. I looked at Renee, and then at my son. Then I suppose I'll be canceling the trust. The dinner rolls Marcus had been stacking toppled over. Nobody moved to pick them up. What? Daniel's voice came out strange, like the word cost him something. The financial trust. I'll call Robert on Monday and have it restructured. Mom, that's... He stopped. Started again. You can't make decisions like that based on one argument at Thanksgiving dinner. I've been listening to variations of this argument for 4 years, I said. I just finally heard it clearly. Renee's composure slipped for the first time. You're being dramatic. I'm being precise, I said. There's a difference. I spent 31 years being precise. Nobody spoke. Sophie asked if she could be excused, and I said, yes, sweetheart, go on. And she slipped out of her chair and disappeared toward the living room with the instincts of a child who understands when the adults need space. I served myself another slice of cornbread dressing because I'd made it well and I wasn't going to let the conversation ruin my appetite. I'd eaten field rations in a tent in 110-degree heat. I could certainly eat at my own dining room table. They left before 3 o'clock. Renee moved quickly, gathering the children's things with the focused efficiency of a woman who'd gotten what she needed. Daniel hugged me at the door. It was the hug of a man who was confused and a little frightened and wasn't ready to sort out which of those feelings was his own. Mom, just think about what you're doing. I always think about what I'm doing, Daniel. That's something I'm quite good at. He left. I stood in the doorway and watched his car back out of my driveway and disappear down the street. And then I stood there another minute in the cold Tennessee air, just because I could. I went inside and ate a full plate of Thanksgiving dinner by myself at my dining room table. I opened a decent bottle of Shiraz. I called my friend Carol, who had also served 24 years, Army Nurse Corps, and told her what had happened. And Carol said, without hesitation, "Good. Now what?" That was the question, wasn't it? I didn't sleep that night, not because I was devastated, but because my mind was working the problem the way it had always worked problems, methodically, without sentiment. By 4 in the morning, I was at my kitchen table with a legal pad and a cup of coffee, making a list. The list started with the trust and ended with the house. Here was the thing about the house that Renee didn't know that Daniel probably didn't fully understand. I had never planned to die in it. I'd bought it as a soft landing after retirement, a place to regroup and decide what came next. But I was 63 years old and I was still deciding. And somewhere in the comfort of routines and Sunday dinners that had slowly stopped happening, I'd let myself believe that staying put was the same thing as belonging somewhere. It wasn't the same thing at all. I called my financial advisor Robert on Monday morning. "I want to revisit the trust," I told him. Revisit meaning Daniel is no longer the sole beneficiary. I want to restructure. Split between 3 military charities I've been involved with, 1 scholarship fund at my alma mater, and a smaller allocation for the grandchildren directly not through Daniel held until they're 25. Robert was quiet for a moment. "That's a significant change, Margaret." "It is. Can I ask what prompted it?" "My daughter-in-law told me I don't fit into her family. I decided she might be right, and that the money should go somewhere it fits better." He laughed, which I appreciated. "I'll have documents ready by Wednesday." After I hung up, I sat at my desk in the room I'd converted into a home office, surrounded by my military photographs and the little shadow box with my ribbons and my retirement flag, and I let myself think about Renee. Not with anger. With the kind of dispassionate analysis I'd applied to personnel problems for 30 years. She was not, I had come to believe, simply a difficult person. She was a person who had spent 4 years systematically ensuring that she was the center of Daniel's world, and that anyone who might remind Daniel of who he was before her, his mother, his college friends, his army connections, was gradually moved to the perimeter. I'd noticed it slowly. The way he'd stopped calling on Sundays as regularly. The way he deferred to her on decisions he once would have made confidently. The way he'd started using phrases that sounded like hers, perspectives that didn't quite match the son I'd raised. I called Daniel's college roommate, James, who'd been at the wedding and whom I hadn't spoken to in almost 2 years. "Mrs. Holloway," he said, surprised. "Hey, is everything okay?" "I'm fine, James. I'm actually calling to check on you. When's the last time you and Daniel got together?" A pause. "Honestly? The wedding. I've texted a few times. He always says he'll get back to me. He never does." "Does that seem like Daniel to you?" Another pause. Longer. "No, ma'am, it doesn't." We talked for 20 minutes. James told me about running into Daniel and Renee at a restaurant 8 months ago. How Daniel had seemed uncomfortable, almost nervous, and how Renee had answered most of James's questions before Daniel could. How, when James had suggested the 3 of them grab a beer sometime without the kids, just catch up, Renee had answered for Daniel that their schedule was too packed these days. I thanked James and hung up and sat for a long time with the weight of what I was putting together. I knew this pattern. I'd studied it. In my last years of service, I'd worked extensively with the family support unit on base, and I had sat across from more than a few spouses who had described, in careful language, the slow process of losing themselves inside a marriage. Isolation dressed as togetherness. Control that looked, from the outside, like a close-knit couple. This was not just Renee being difficult. This was something else. I picked up the phone again and called a realtor. Her name was Patricia, and she'd helped 2 of my neighbors sell their homes in the past year. "Patricia, I'm thinking of listing my house in Clarksville. I want to know what the market looks like." Her voice lit up. "Margaret, honestly, the timing could not be better. I have a list of families looking in your neighborhood right now. What kind of timeline are you thinking?" "Soon," I said. "Before Christmas, if possible." "That's ambitious, but not impossible. Can I come by Thursday?" "I'll have coffee ready." After I hung up, I walked through my house the way you walk through a place when you're starting to say goodbye to it. The living room with the built-in bookshelves Daniel and I had installed together the summer after I retired. The back porch where I'd watched the kids catch fireflies last July. The kitchen where I'd cooked Tuesday through Thursday last week for people who'd left before 3 o'clock. I stopped at the hall closet where I kept the memorabilia. I hadn't found a better place for yet old photographs. The kids' drawings from when they were very small. A folder of cards I'd received over the years. I was reaching for a storage box when a smaller envelope fell from between two photo albums. It was a card in my ex-husband's handwriting. Thomas. We'd divorced 17 years ago when the marriage finally couldn't survive another deployment. And we'd made peace with each other eventually, the way people do when there are children involved. He died of a heart attack 5 years ago, and I still sometimes found traces of him in unexpected places. The card was from before the divorce, a birthday card, ordinary, nothing dramatic. But tucked inside was a folded note in his handwriting that I'd clearly never seen before. It must have gotten lost in a book or a box and migrated here over many moves. Talked to Daniel's school counselor today. He says D is showing signs of anxiety, is too focused on trying to make everyone happy. She says kids from military families sometimes develop this always trying to smooth things over, never letting themselves have needs. Worth watching. Talk when you get home. I stood in my hallway holding that note for a long time. Thomas had written it when Daniel was 12, while I was in my 3rd deployment. I'd never gotten home to have that conversation. There had been another crisis, another extension, and then things with Thomas had started to deteriorate in ways that couldn't be recovered. Daniel had grown up learning to keep the peace, to agree, to smooth things over and never let himself have needs, and he'd married a woman who had found that quality very useful. I sat down on the floor of my hallway, not because I'm dramatic, but because I was 63, and sometimes the floor is the right place to sit when you're processing something important, and I stayed there for a good 20 minutes thinking about my son at 12 years old, anxious and trying to make everyone happy while his mother was on the other side of the world. My neighbor Beverly knocked on my back door around 10 o'clock. She was 71, a retired social worker, and she had one of those presences that immediately signals that there is nothing you can tell her that will shock her. "I saw Daniel's car leave early yesterday," she said, when I let her in and handed her coffee. "You okay?" "Thinking," I said. I told her everything. Beverly listened the way a good social worker listens, without filling silences, without redirecting, without reassuring me when reassurance wasn't what I needed. When I finished, she said, "How long has Renee been doing this?" 4 years. No, I mean the pattern. Isolating him from support systems, speaking for him, reframing your relationship in ways that make you the problem. 4 years, as far as I can see it. She nodded slowly. And has Daniel ever contradicted her? When it's just the two of you? I thought about it. He'll sometimes say things like, "Renee has a point," or, "I know you and Renee don't always see eye to eye." He doesn't disagree with her out loud. Does he call you? Initiate contact without her knowing? I thought harder. He used to. The last time was, I think, January. Beverly wrapped both hands around her coffee cup. "Margaret, what you're describing isn't just a difficult daughter-in-law. It's a controlled man who doesn't know he's being controlled." The word landed the way certain words do, with the particular weight of something you already knew but hadn't let yourself name. "He's 44 years old," I said. "He was a commissioned officer. He ran a team of 12 engineers before he moved to the private sector. And coercive control doesn't care about any of that," Beverly said gently. "It starts quietly and builds so gradually that the person inside it can't see the walls. By the time they can, they usually believe the walls are their own ideas." I called Patricia the next morning and told her to schedule the photographer. By the following Tuesday, my house was on the market. Daniel called that afternoon. I could tell from the quality of his silence when I answered that he'd just found out. "The house is listed, Mom. I just saw it online." "Yes? What is happening with you right now? You've lost your mind. This is grief or PTSD or something, and you need to talk to someone before you make decisions you can't reverse." I'd had subordinates try to tell me I was too emotional to make decisions. It never worked, and it wasn't working now. "I've made irreversible decisions under conditions you cannot imagine," I said, "and I've never had cause to regret my judgment. I'm not going to start now." "Mom." His voice cracked slightly, which cost me something. This is our family home. This is where the kids grew up coming. This is. You can't just erase it. I can do whatever I choose with my own house, Daniel. That's one of the things your grandfather's generation of soldiers made possible for people like me. Don't make this about your service right now. Everything I have is because of my service. My house, my savings, the trust I've been restructuring, all of it is mine because I earned it, and I'm free to make decisions about it. He hung up on me. 2 hours later, Renee called, and I let it go to voicemail. Her message was 17 seconds long and contained the words sabotage, manipulative, and the children don't understand why Grammy is being so selfish. I saved the voicemail. A woman who spent 31 years in the army knows to document things. The following week brought a pattern I can only describe as a coordinated campaign. Missed calls from Daniel at unusual hours. A long email from Renee that was clearly written for an audience, formal, measured, structured with bullet points. The kind of email someone writes when they're keeping a record. A visit from Daniel's Aunt Barbara on Renee's side, who showed up at my door with a fruit basket and a lot of opinions about how I was destroying the family. I offered her coffee. She declined. I showed her the door. What the campaign didn't anticipate was that I had spent 31 years making decisions under pressure from people who thought they could outlast me. Nobody had ever outlasted me. Patricia called Thursday evening. Margaret, I have a couple interested. They're in from Lexington, relocating for work. 2 daughters, 13 and 10. They walked through this afternoon, and the wife cried in the kitchen. She cried? Happy tears. She said it felt like home immediately. They want to offer full asking price. I sat with that for a moment, the woman from Lexington crying in my kitchen. I hope she cried the way I had 17 years ago when I'd first walked through the house I'd raised Daniel in. Happy tears, home-finding tears, the best kind. Tell them yes, I said. I had already found my next place. Not in Clarksville. I was moving to Beaufort, South Carolina, a town I'd fallen in love with during a posting at Paris Island 20 years ago. A small house, 2 blocks from the water, a screened porch, a yard large enough for a garden and small enough to manage. The woman selling it was 82 and moving to be closer to her daughter, and when I'd called her directly, she'd said, "Honey, I'm glad it's going to someone who'll appreciate the quiet." I would appreciate the quiet. The closing was 3 weeks before Christmas. I'd spent the intervening weeks sorting through 31 years of accumulated life, which is a project I recommend to anyone who has been carrying too much for too long. Military service makes you good at packing only what matters. I'd gotten out of practice. Most things went to donation. Daniel's childhood things, the baseball trophies, the school projects I'd saved in labeled boxes, the pictures drawn in crayon, age 5, age 6, age 7. I carefully packed and put in a storage unit with a note attached to the key. For Daniel, when he's ready. I kept my uniform, my ribbons and my retirement flag in their shadow box. My mother's linens. Martha's good china, wait, no, that's another woman's story. I kept my grandmother's cast iron skillet, the one that had come with me to Germany and Fort Hood and Fort Campbell, and home again. I kept the note from Thomas. The closing was unremarkable in the way that important things often are: a conference room, a stack of papers, signatures that took 20 minutes to complete. The family from Lexington were named Collins. The wife, Diana, shook my hand and held it a beat longer than necessary. "Thank you," she said. "I know it's strange, but I feel like I should thank you." "Take good care of the back porch," I told her. "It gets the best light in the late afternoon." She nodded like she understood exactly what I meant. I was 3 days into my new house in Beaufort, still surrounded by boxes I hadn't found the energy to unpack, when I heard a car in the driveway. I looked out the window and saw Daniel. He was alone. He looked like a man who had not been sleeping well and knew it. His hair was longer than he usually wore it, and there were shadows under his eyes. And when he got out of the car and stood in my driveway looking up at the house, he looked younger than 34, and older than 34 at the same time. I opened the door before he knocked. "How did you find the address?" I asked. "Patricia," he said. She felt bad for me. "Come in." He came in. He stood in the middle of my half-unpacked living room, surrounded by boxes and the cast-iron skillet on the kitchen counter, and the shadow box of ribbons I'd propped against the wall because I hadn't figured out where to hang it yet, and he looked around like he was trying to understand what world he'd walked into. "Mom," he said. I left. I sat down. Tell me. He sat across from me, on a box that wasn't properly sealed, and he talked for a long time. He talked about the past 4 years in a way he'd never talked about them before, the way every decision had gradually required Renee's input, then Renee's approval, then Renee's initiation. The way his friendships had thinned out until he couldn't clearly remember the last time he'd talked to someone who'd known him before her. The way he'd started to hear himself agreeing with things he didn't actually believe and noticed it only distantly, like watching himself from a great height. He talked about Thanksgiving, about sitting at my table while his wife said those things and feeling the truth of them land wrong not because they were accurate, but because some part of him had known for years that something was wrong and had been waiting for an outside shock to make it undeniable. She's been telling me for years that you're manipulative, he said. That your service gives you a hero complex, that you make everything about what you've sacrificed. And I started believing it because she said it so often. Do you believe it now? He looked at me for a long time. I believe you have very high expectations, and that you're not always easy. I believe you sometimes lead with your service when you don't need to. But manipulative? He shook his head. No. You have never in my life tried to manipulate me. You've always been exactly what you are. There are things that break your heart that you were not expecting to be broken by. That was one of them. Where are you staying? I asked. I've got a hotel for now. My buddy James is letting me crash with him starting next week. He almost smiled. James said he's been waiting for my call for 2 years. He has, I said. You should call him. We sat in the half-unpacked living room for the rest of the afternoon, drinking the only tea I'd been able to find in my boxes and watching the light shift over the South Carolina water through my back windows. We talked the way we used to talk when he was young. Not carefully, not strategically, just honestly, with the particular ease of two people who know each other well enough to say the hard things without needing them to be perfect. I told him about the note his father had written. About the 12-year-old who'd been anxious and trying to make everyone happy. He was quiet for a long time after that. I've been in therapy for 6 weeks, he said finally. I didn't tell Renee I started. That was the first decision I made without telling her in 2 years. What does the therapist say? She says I need to figure out who I am separate from both Renee and from you. She says I've spent my whole life either managing your absence or managing Renee's expectations, and I don't actually know what I want when nobody's asking anything of me. That was honest enough to sit with in silence, and I let it sit. She's right, I said eventually. And I want you to know something. I don't need you to make up for the deployments. I don't need you to compensate for Thomas, or for the years when I wasn't there. I made choices that cost you things, and that's mine to carry, not yours to fix. He looked at the floor. His jaw moved. What about Sophie and Marcus? I asked. They're with Renee. She'd never, whatever else is true, she's a good mother. I would never keep the kids from her. I just need distance to figure out what comes next. Can you bring them to visit sometime? I have a screened porch. He laughed. It was the laugh I recognized his real one, the one that came from somewhere unguarded. Marcus is going to lose his mind over that porch. I'm counting on it. He stayed for dinner, and we ordered pizza, because most of my kitchen was still in boxes, and we ate it on the floor of my new living room because I only had one chair unpacked, and it was one of the better Thanksgiving weeks I could remember in recent years. When he left, he hugged me the way he used to hug me when he came home on leave, both arms, full contact, the kind that meant something. I'm sorry, Mom, he said into my shoulder. For all of it. For letting it happen. Don't be sorry, I said. Figure out who you are. That's all I want. I walked back into my new house after his car pulled away and stood in the half-unpacked living room with the box of cast-iron skillets and the shadow box of ribbons and 31 years of service distilled into the things that had been worth keeping. At 63, I was starting again. I had my pension and my dignity and a screened porch 2 blocks from the water. I had a son who was, slowly and with professional help, finding his way back to himself. I had grandchildren who would come visit and lose their minds over the porch. I had Beverly's number and James back in Daniel's life and all the people I hadn't made room for when I was busy waiting for a family dinner that never went the way I'd hoped. Monday morning, I called the local Veterans of Foreign Wars post and asked if they needed volunteers. Tuesday, I walked to the farmer's market and spent 45 minutes talking to the man who grew heirloom tomatoes, because I had time for that now, and I intended to use it. And on Thursday, 2 weeks before Christmas, I planted the first thing in my new garden. A rose bush, not because I'd ever been particularly sentimental about roses, but because a woman I'd served with had once told me that roses are the stubbornest things alive, that they'll grow in terrible soil and survive winters that ought to kill them and bloom again every spring like they have something to prove. I've always liked things that have something to prove. Now, I'm curious about you who have stayed with me until the end. Have you ever had to walk away from something you loved in order to save yourself? Have you ever had a Thanksgiving like mine? Drop your answer in the comments below and tell me what city or state you're watching from. I want to know how far this story has traveled. Thank you for being here with me today. Sometimes the bravest thing isn't charging into battle, it's quietly packing your bags and choosing yourself when the people you love have forgotten your worth. Margaret didn't leave out of bitterness. She left to remind her son that love without respect is just habit. And in letting go of the house, she made room for something truer to grow back on honest ground. At last, a small note for you. This story was created and fictionalized by AI, crafted to bring you a moment of meaningful entertainment, while carrying a positive life lesson close to the heart.